Why is the topic of consent really important? I'm here with Amy Phillips and Carlton, or Mr. Black, and they are talking at Woodhull Sexual Freedom Summit this year on We Need More Than Yes, Marginalization and the Dangers of Performative Consent in BDSM communities. I'm Kathy Vertilli from the IntimacyDojo.com. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
And this is such, I mean, you couldn't have timed the topic better, or maybe you purposely did that, but consent and marginalization is such a key topic right now, and I think there's so many nuances around it that people need. Having someone talk about it and hold space for that is so important. Thank you so much. What made you decide to talk about this now at Woodhull?
I don't think you're ever done talking about consent. I don't think the job of talking about consent is ever done.
Yes.
So it's not about the fact that we're doing it at this moment. It's just about that every year there's some sort of situation or something that comes up that again, you realize that your job is never done when talking about consent.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, when we present or we're like organizing an event or putting something together, only part of it is what people see, like coming up with all the cool stuff to have at a party. The rest of it is the behind the scenes things about how do you create a safer space, how do you create a space that upholds consent culture and is truly a safe space for people to interact and to be in.
It's really challenging, especially if you're trying to include marginalized communities and making sure they have voices. That's how do you balance all of that?
Exactly.
Well, one thing that we're going to kind of identify in our talk is that I don't think when people talk about consent, people often talk about the fact that there are marginalized people that can be more susceptible to consent violations because there's a power imbalance. Because a lot of times there are people that are in power and have like authority or power or knowledge in a community, and they're able to use that in a manner where they can basically subvert consent, or they can subvert people that are marginalized. And I don't think people really talk about the aspect of power imbalances in consent.
I think so many people aren't even aware of privilege and the power imbalances they have. They just think, oh, this is how it is. And so they're not aware that other people may be intimidated or feel silenced by their words or their power. How do you deal with that? Like how in your talk or in your community, what are some ways that you deal with that?
Well, I think the first thing that you have to do is you have to really identify that it does exist. And I think a lot of times when you're in a sex positive community, whether it's a lover community, the BDSM community, a work community, a sex educated community, we sometimes think that we are kind of like breathing verified air, or we're a little better than everybody else. And we don't always check ourselves, and we don't always look at our communities and look at problematic behaviors and really call them out and say, you know, I think somebody may be really cool and really awesome, but what they're doing is it's not cool and it's not right. And I don't think that we often enough really address that issue. And because of that, that helps to create the power imbalance. And we see it, like Amy sees it in the other communities, also all the time. We both see it in BDSM communities, where you may have a group of people and they basically they subvert somebody else's consent because they have power. And we don't always really address that. So I think that's the biggest thing, to actually just address and call it out. And then the second part of our talk is talking about what we call performative consent.
Yeah,
and
could you explain that to people that wouldn't know what that is?
Well, performative consent is almost like a take on people that are like performative allies, in a sense, and we are kind of adapting that to the conversation on consent. And performative consent is essentially people that they may teach about consent, and they preach and they practice, and they're considered community leaders. But if you look at their behaviors, they're doing anything but upholding consensual behavior. and they're using the power that they have or the influence and the privilege that they have in a community to basically subvert that consent. So that's how we can be in communities a lot of times, and we have people that are super popular, teaching classes, leading play spaces, and holding positions of power. But at the same time, they've got all of these egregious consent violations and all of these problematic behaviors. And people will say, "Well, that person was an awesome verb teacher, or they own a great play space, or they've always been nice to me." And they have that on one hand, but on the other hand, they're using that power imbalance to do things that really are problematic when it comes to consent.
I'm really glad you're speaking to this. So I have a question for you, if you're willing, a personal question. I've recently had someone tell me I'm very, very shy, and I tend to be insecure. And in my own little niche, people have said that I'm an influential person, like in my little pond that I'm in. And I never see myself as that. So I never was considering myself as powerful. I wasn't considering that I had privilege. How do we know? I think a lot of us, we may perceive someone else as being very powerful and not ourselves, or vice versa. The perception of power isn't always like you're getting number 3 and you get a number 5 and I get a number 7 and that's how powerful we are. But there's no rating in different communities and different positions. We might have more or less power. And so, I love this topic, and I'm not trying to dilute it in any way. I'm really curious, how do we balance that? I'm wondering if you have any insights on that, because to me, it's we may not recognize we have a power in a given community, or someone else may perceive us as having a lot of power when we may not feel like we do. And so definitely I try to be very consensual and try to be very respectful of someone. But if I'm not aware that they view me as this powerful person in this one little niche I'm in, how do I know and address that with them? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think one of the things is that you're doing it right the first time, is that you are listening, right? If somebody says, "I view you as a person of power," then, like it or not, that's a space that you're holding for them, mm-hmm. and likely for other people. We're not always so lucky that somebody gets to tell us how they view us in a community. Sometimes you just hear it secondhand. So luckily you got to hear it firsthand. I view you as a powerful person. Mm-hmm. You can ask them, if they're willing, why they view you as that, and then you might have more insight into why you might be viewed as a powerful person to other people. Like if you present at a lot of conferences, mm-hmm. if you are able to call a conference or a group and a lot of people attend, then you know that you have a lot of sticky power. People come to whatever you say. So mm-hmm. Whether you have a lot or a little power, I think we all have to realize that we have power, mm-hmm. no matter how we're viewed in the community. So I think that it's a matter of just sort of owning whatever we have, mm-hmm. and making sure that we're using whatever voice we have to make sure that consent is never violated. I mean, I know you can think, well, if I say this person did it wrong and they're a powerful person, I'm going to get shouted down. That may be true, but at least somehow, you spoke up or whatnot.
Yeah, no, that's really important. I really like you, if you're getting people to come out to your events, or people are turning to you for advice, or if you present at a conference, those are things that I can consciously look at, versus I don't feel I think sometimes when we're in positions of power, we're not actually feeling power. Some people do, certainly, but some people don't necessarily feel powerful. And how do you know, I don't ever want to shut down anyone's voice. So thank you. That was really good.
Power is also ephemeral too. I mean, it's very temporary. But one rumor, one mess up, and it can go away. And in our communities, it can go away very fast. And that's another thing I think we're all conscious of. Yeah. Sorry, Carl. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I saw you. Go ahead.
Oh, it's all good. I think too, it's also very important to maintain a sense of humility, mm-hmm. and to recognize that you do have privilege, and privilege sometimes changes, where you can have privilege in one community, mm-hmm. and perhaps not have privilege in another community. Yeah. But I think it's very important too. Behaviors are very important, in how you treat people, how you receive people, how you listen, and a lot of times we don't like to hear that we've messed up, we've screwed up something, but we need to be able to receive those messages, all the way from big important things to if somebody comes to you and says, well, I didn't like something that you taught, or I didn't feel comfortable with the behavior that you exhibited. I think it's important to be open to receiving that and to creating a space where you can exchange with people, not as a leader or somebody that's above everybody,
Mm.
but as a part of a community and actually interact with people. And people can feel like because they speak to you, that they're not going to face a reprisal, and you're not going to have that power imbalance of, okay, you said something that I don't like, you're not going to get an invite to a play space, or you're not
Oh
going to go
yeah.
to a party, or you're not going to go to this conference or something.
Or I'm going to
People
talk
don't
bad
feel,
about you behind to other people or whatever it
yes,
is. Yeah. Wow. Thank you. I love this discussion because I think that people. I know that I've talked to a lot of people that are afraid. They're not sure how to interact, and they want to do the right thing, but they're sometimes afraid to speak up, or they're afraid if they speak up, there will be reprisals. So it sounds like you're saying a big part of this is role modeling, that people can bring feedback to you, and like even if it's painful, saying thank you so much. Can I ask other questions, or can I just consider what you shared for a while and come back to you? Like just being really thoughtful about it and letting them know that it matters. Did I summarize that well?
that I think it goes a little deeper than
Okay,
that
please.
too. Also, just your personal integrity when you interact with people, to have a certain mode and a certain method of behavior, where if you're doing something, and I think it's one thing that people don't always talk about, like in sex positive communities, is maintaining a sense of professionalism sometimes
Mm-hmm.
when you're dealing with people. And if you're talking about presenting or teaching or holding a position of authority, not a, I don't want to say a position of authority, but a position of influence, maintaining that professional level or that professional standard where you have consent culture, where you are trying to receive people in the right way, where you're being respectful of people, and you're really proactively working to create a true safe space, not a performative safe space, or not a
Uh,
performative consent
yeah,
culture.
not authentic, really authentic, not just when other people are watching that might judge you. Yeah, that's wonderful. What are I don't know if you can share any examples, and it's if you can't, that's fine. I understand they might be private, but have you had some examples in your community where you've had to work through this or help your community understand this?
Yes, all the time. That would probably take the next 4 or 5 hours to talk about, like
Okay.
some of the different issues. And just like to give you like a, I guess a small synopsis. We produce a lot of events,
Hmm.
and Amy and I both are always going back and forth about, like, okay, what tone are we setting when we produce an event? What tone are we presenting? Are we going to have something in an event that may be triggering to people?
Mm.
Are we going to have something in an event that may, even by the tone or the language that we use, is it going to be exclusionary, or
Mm.
is it going to marginalize people? When you have certain people and you want to have certain people in events doing demos or something like that, is it a problematic person?
Mm.
I mean, it doesn't matter if somebody is awesome with rope or awesome with throwing a whip or any other skill that you may have. Is that person a safe person or a person that you want in a space? And sometimes you have to make decisions of, I'm not going to work with this play space, or I'm not going to engage this certain group of people
Mm.
because I can't do it and feel comfortable that I can maintain a certain level of, I guess, consent, or a certain quality of consent. And you're constantly making those decisions. And like I say, we've got so many, we've got so many examples of that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a constant ongoing thing.
Yeah. Well, and I sometimes I think I've considered everything, and then someone else will come up with something else, and I'm like, oh, why didn't I think of that before? Like, I think I try to always be evolving. My FAQ keeps getting things added to it as things come up, and I'm like, I feel bad that I didn't think of it before, but at least it's there
Right.
now. So,
Yeah.
um,
It just takes some active listening on our parts, I think, and also realize that even within relationships, consent dynamic changes. What may be good one day doesn't necessarily mean it'll be good the next.
sadly,
I
yeah,
think
it
that,
changes all the
yeah,
time.
sometimes we get into, oh, I did it before to them, so I can do it
Hmm.
again. But yeah, it's just about active listening is the best skill that you can bring into the BDSM.
I think that's true for any community, but I love that you're sharing because I think with BDSM, you're bringing in a whole other level of like not only are you juggling 15 items, but you're throwing in a knife and a whip and a
Yeah,
flaming torch maybe that you have to juggle.
exactly.
Now, I've never seen, we do use throwing knives, but we use throwing knives in knife play because they're easier to clean, but I've never actually seen anybody throw a knife.
That's probably
No,
good if you're
no
in a
throwing.
play space. So why did you choose Woodhull? You're speaking at Woodhull Sexual Freedom Summit. Why did you choose Woodhull for this for as a venue for you presenting your talk? This talk.
It's a very thoughtful space.
Mm.
The audience is engaged, and you don't have to like bring them up to speed necessarily on some of the uh, basic points of whatever you're going to. I mean, I feel like you can really get into a deep discussion about whatever your topic is, and you're going to get intelligent, attentive feedback. Sometimes you'll get challenged a little bit, which is also good, but in a respectful way. And I think that Woodhull is the place for ideas that maybe exist outside of the play space. Like this is a great thing to talk about in a play space, but people aren't coming to play space to talk about performative consent. So where do you take something like that? And so Woodhull is a great place for us to do that.
Wonderful.
Um, this will be our third year attending
Yeah.
Woodhull and presenting at Woodhull. And as Amy said, I think it's a thoughtful space, and it's a space that kind of facilitates ideas. Play spaces are awesome, but sometimes when you're going somewhere just for the party and just to hang out and look really cool, you get a lot of the party, but you don't always get a lot of the thought. And to me, Woodhull is almost like taking classes with like really, really smart people that really are
Yep.
thoughtful and will challenge you. So, like another event may be like going to hang out with friends. This is kind of like going to school and for 3 days and like taking like a really, really great intensive with some excellent professors that force you to think about things.
Oh, that's wonderful. I really love that. If someone hadn't ever come to Woodhull before, what would you recommend? What would you tell them if they weren't sure if they should go?
Well, we actually address this because in addition to presenting, we're also hosting a mixer
Oh, how nice.
on Thursday night. So what we want to do is we know that it can be sometimes overwhelming, like if you've never been to Woodhull before, or you perhaps have never been to a conference before.
Mm-hmm.
We
Mm-hmm.
want to welcome everybody in. So it's important to say, if this is your first conference experience, how do you take care of yourself? How do you get the most out of your conference experience? How do you kind of integrate yourself into that small like community that tends to form at conferences? How do you navigate it? And how do you find a space that's comfortable for you? And how do you take care of yourself? Because it's extremely important too when you go to conferences to take care of yourself.
Oh, that's brilliant. I'm so glad you're doing it. I remember my first one. I made it through, but I slept for like a week afterwards. I was like, I was in a coma almost. So,
Oh wow.
yeah. Thank you so much. Are there any, so if someone wanted to explore consent, marginalization, and power, and performative consent, or do you have any good references or resources they could go to, or any last thoughts you want to share on the topic?
I would say really that don't take anybody as an expert when it comes to consent. I think if performative consent teaches us anything, that if somebody says, I'm a consent guy or I'm a consent expert, or I even heard once there was a famous BDSM educator who said, we're basically all consent experts. And I think when you start to get that mentality, that what it does is you start to think that you can't screw up or you can't make
Yeah.
mistakes. And I think that what you have to do is it goes back to almost having that humility of saying, I don't know everything. I want to have the best behaviors and I want to have always respectful consensual behaviors, but I also want to learn. I want to speak to other people. I want to talk to other people. I want to get other feedback about things.
Yeah.
And I always want to be open to asking, learning, and go from that standpoint. So, what I would say is, um, there was a famous thing that Bruce Lee had that he would tell all of his students, and we mention it when we teach BDSM classes. He would tell his students, his Jeet Kune Do students, I want you to take what is useful and use it. I want you to discard what is not useful. So if you learn something and you come and you hear a presentation about consent, I want you to take the things that are useful and apply them to your particular situation or your community. If there are things that you don't find are useful or perhaps even problematic, be willing to challenge that. Be willing to
Mm.
say, I don't think that may work in my community, or I think there's something that could be done better. And what that does is that way consent becomes dynamic, it builds, it grows, and it strengthens instead of having a person say, I'm the consent guy and what I say goes, and we don't ever consider that maybe not the best behaviors and not the best things being done.
I love that. And I think consent keeps changing too. So, like, even 5 years ago, I didn't hear a lot of conversations around privilege and power around consent. There was a lot about enthusiasm. People are starting to talk more about yeses and being enthusiastic, but now that's a very big part of the dialogue. So, we're growing and evolving. If I say I'm an expert, I don't necessarily think I have to grow and evolve with the changing nuances we learn.
Exactly.
So, thank you so much. Amy, do you have anything you want to add?
I do. I think you summed it up pretty well.
All right. Well, if you're watching this and you want to learn more about Carlton and Amy, you can go to the Black Pomegranate. I love that name.com. theblackpomegranate.com. I'll put the link below. And if you have questions or comments, please leave them below. We'll do our best to get back to you. Thank you both so much for your generosity. And this is a tough topic to bring out in a community, but so important. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.